Welcome back to our continued studies in the book of Ecclesiastes. This time we are in chapter 2, moving beyond verse 11, continuing with verse 12, moving toward the end of chapter 2. Ecclesiastes 2, verse 12. We know already from previous classes that if life here on earth is all you have, God is not in your life. The reality is vanity and a chasing after the wind. It is common in our time for people to try and find the purpose of life here on earth, under the sun, without God who made the sun. Ecclesiastes speaks to the vanity of that kind of living. Not looking high enough may be one way to describe it. Attempting to find purpose and meaning here on earth without God. Solomon says that's vanity. I'm going to read now English Standard Version, Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 12. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For of the wise as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me. For all is vanity and a striving after wind. I'm continuing now at verse 18. I hated all my toil, in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled, and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. I'm continuing at verse 24. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. Ecclesiastes 2, 12 through 26. Picture someone not in a relationship with God, frantically trying to find the meaning of life, but without God. Chasing after one adventure and then another adventure, self-indulgent living, as described in chapter 2, 1 through 11. Conclusion, there's nothing to be gained under the sun. So now, instead of looking higher, the quest under the sun continues in an almost frantic pass. Is it this? You pass over that? Is it this? Is it something else? Wisdom, madness, folly, toil. These two paragraphs in chapter 2, from 12 to the end of the chapter, after the narrative of the self-indulgent experiment, relate further attempts to find purpose and meaning under the sun, yet in vain. In verses 12 through 17, Solomon says, I went back then to consider wisdom and madness and folly. And he indicates that his consideration had attached to it his ambition to do what nobody would be able to do after him. What can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. He thought he was onto something, reminiscent of verse 9, I became great. Being smart, that's it. Exceeding the efforts of the fools. Being wise and enlightened, not like the fools who walk in darkness. But then he realized the same event happens to all, wise or fool. You die and you are forgotten. The keynote of this paragraph, verse 16, the wise dies just like the fool. In all our activity here on earth, which includes what we think, say, and do, and how we interact with people and events, two truths need our attention. One, being smarter than someone else is not really fulfilling. Maybe a little surge of temporal pride, but that's not a foundation to build your life on. You can educate yourself and learn great things and achieve worldly marks of success, far exceeding the fools, the peers around you. That may generate a little temporary pride or boasting, but you can't live on that. You can't face God with that resume that you did so much better than others. Number two, death is not an event you can avoid by being wise. You can't educate yourself away from death. The wise die just like the fool. Read the obituaries. People have documented lengthy college degrees, arriving at high positions in corporations and in societies, perhaps well known in their field, or even celebrities. And right next to that obituary, someone who had a third-grade education, a laboring man, never made the headlines, not widely known, but just as dead as the PhD. Neither are to be dismissed or denounced for their choices in life. One became well known, the other didn't. But now they're equal in death. Death is not an event you can educate yourself out of. The wise dies just like the fool. Likewise, it can be said, death is not an event you can work yourself out of through manual labor. If God is not in your life, if I refuse the call of the gospel, if I indulge myself in every pleasure and become smarter than my peers, that's not permanent life fulfillment. We are back to vanity and a striving after when life under the sun does not include God. I kind of like the contemporary English version as published in the United Kingdom in verses 16 and 17. Wise or foolish, we all die and are soon forgotten. Solomon said, this made me hate life. Everything we do is painful. It's just as senseless as chasing the wind. Now let's move to verses 18 through 26. That's the next paragraph, 18 through 26. in Ecclesiastes chapter 2. So, as you look at this final paragraph in Ecclesiastes 2, let's observe there is a tone of misery here. Words and phrases are put here to convey the idea or mood of misery, depression. Look at these phrases. I hated all my toil. Who knows whether the next guy will be wise or a fool? I toiled, I used my wisdom, but all was vanity. There are the words despair and sorrow and vexation. This is not your happy place in Scripture. This wasn't Solomon's happy place in his journey through life. Life under the sun without God is dreary, a striving after wind. Then, notice this. No matter how hard you work or how much treasure or experience you pass on to someone else, your successors or heirs, they may turn out to be fools. Solomon's remark is, this also is vanity and a great evil. If your whole life is about leaving a legacy that will benefit your family heirs or your business successors, a legacy that is limited to earth existence under the sun, Solomon advises you don't really know how that will turn out. You could leave $1 million to an heir who is a fool, and he burns through that in a year. If your life's meaning is how you toil and how much you communicate and how much you leave to those after you under the sun, verse 23 says, this also is vanity. You know, fear God and keep His commandments. That's the conclusion Solomon is leading to. I'm going to come back in a second with a few takeaways. You may hear the argument, the answer to the world's problems is education. I need to be clear, I don't want to be misunderstood here. There is great value in a good education, and parents have obligation to be certain their children are well prepared to be productive citizens. But will you consider the case of Solomon, who was given an education, who knew wisdom in the secular and spiritual sense? God was generous to Solomon, but he's really telling us in this text, being smart is not a guarantee of happiness. Solomon tells us in this book, wisdom cannot change reality. Wisdom can increase sorrow. And now he says, the wise and the fool meet at the same place, in the cemetery. So let us say to our children, get that education and prepare to be productive and useful under the sun. But if you leave God out, your report card, resume, or success story will not help you when you die and face God. Satisfaction in life is not found in education, not ultimate satisfaction. That's found in fearing God and keeping His commandments. Look back down through these verses we have studied together at how many times toil or a form of that word appears. Verse 18, I hated all my toil. Verse 19, I toiled. 20, 21, 22, 24, striving, toil. 6 times in the English Standard Version, a form of this word toil. In some translations, labor. The theme here is, you work so hard, but you must leave the fruit of your labor to another who after the sun will come after you. And so if God is not in your life, no matter how hard you work, how much you earn, how much fame you achieve, what kind of legacy you have, or what you leave to others, if God is not in your life, no matter if you have millions or billions that you accumulate and leave, there is no good eternal outcome. I want to call attention to verse 18. I hated all my toil, in which I toiled under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. I want to ask you, does this ever happen, what I'm going to describe? A man works very hard at breakneck speed, 12 to 15 hours a day, little time off. He builds a huge empire, enterprise, or portfolio. The man dies, and all of that is left to someone who spends it or squanders it. I think that happens every day. It happened to Solomon. Solomon died, leaving everything to his son Rehoboam. Reading about that in 1 Kings 12 and beyond, it's pretty clear. Rehoboam lost everything, and along with Jeroboam, we know the glory of the kingdom was lost, the United Kingdom, in subsequent division and conflict. So what Solomon feared came to pass. He died, leaving all his earnings as a legacy to his oldest son. Rehoboam was not wise, and as a fool, everything Solomon worked so hard to gain was lost. What do we learn? You spend your whole life gathering and collecting and building and amassing a fortune, but you can't take it with you. Someone else will get it, and who knows if they will use it wisely or lose it because they're a fool. There are people we all know who work very hard and achieve worldly success and then die, and the fortune they have amassed is wasted, and they pass into eternity without God. Vanity of vanities, a chasing after wind. Here's what I found in one of my commentaries about all this. Here is one of the great frustrations of our existence. We are born with a longing for permanence, a deep desire to do something that will endure or to make something that will last. Yet, the under the sun reality is that we will spend our whole lives working to gain something we cannot keep. It was enough to drive Solomon to despair. The compulsive workaholic who leaves God out of his life to absorb himself in his work creates sorrow for himself and others, doesn't rest well at night, and sets himself up for eventual and eternal vanity. Now, there's a little positive in here. There's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. When is hard work and its fruit enjoyable? When you receive it and engage in it as from the hand of God, yet recognizing that it's not all that life is about, and it doesn't prepare you for eternity. Again, I referred to the contemporary English version published in the UK. The best thing we can do is to enjoy eating and drinking and working, believing these are gifts to us from God. For apart from Him, who can eat or drink or have any enjoyment? Solomon, of course, does not say that learning or wealth or pleasure are evil. They are gifts of God to be received gratefully, so long as we express gratitude and glory to God through our reverent obedience to Him. Verse 26 in the NIV, to the man who pleases Him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness, but to the sinner, He gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. We must proceed slowly and carefully with verse 26. It sounds like, when you first read it, God takes everything that sinners earn, hands it over to the righteous. Literally, we do not see that happening. And in passages like Psalm 73, it is denied. But when the literal interpretation cannot be confirmed, we look for alternate figurative or symbolic meaning. My conclusion is Solomon is giving us a picture composed of words that takes us to this. In pleasing God, there is the highest, greatest kind of happiness and meaning. Living in sin, apart from God, there is nothing but the gathering, the collecting, and the storing up of wealth, only for a while before you leave it. But the real wealth goes to the righteous in the end. The greatest and highest form of wealth goes to those who dedicate their lives to pleasing God. Fear God and keep His commandments.